Durante questa settimana che avremmo parlato nuovamente di ADHD, ecco, che stiamo parlando appunto di sindrome da deficit di attenzione. L'abbiamo fatto con una professionista durante il Medico Risponde, ma questa sera alle ore 18 UK ne parliamo con due presentatori di Classic FM. Loro sono Sam Pittis and Katie Breathwick here with us. Welcome guys, welcome to London One.
Hello, it's lovely to be here.
Yes, buonasera. Yes, I love that. Ciao, guys. So,
Ciao.
Sam Pittis and Katie Breathwick together. You've been working for how long, guys, together?
A very long time, Katie. You answer that question.
Because we have ADHD, we forget the answer to these sorts of questions.
Right.
But we were talking about it the other day, and we measured it by my youngest child, didn't we, Sam? We reckon Sam joined the radio newsroom where I worked at the time when I was pregnant with my youngest, who is 18. So that's how long we've been working together.
Right, so come potete capire entrambi hanno la ADHD e hanno deciso di fare un podcast. So you created a new podcast so recently. I don't know how many episodes, very, very few now that we can listen to any type of digital devices on Global Player as well. Very interesting because finally we can listen to someone who really has ADHD. But one thing that you love about it and one thing that you hate about ADHD, Sam.
I hate the fact that it makes me feel so tired. If I'm really honest, I find that I get a lot of emotional and physical overwhelm, which can tire me out. But I do love the fact that I can think quickly, which means I can often get things done quickly.
And Katie, what about you?
Yeah, those are two great points. I struggle with my memory. That's the thing that's probably affected most by my ADHD. And of course, we know memory affects everything in your life. But the thing I love about it is the energy, actually. Sam talks about it making him very tired, and it does, because it comes in peaks and troughs. But when you're peaking as an ADHDer, it brings so much energy, imagination,
creativity, maybe.
Maybe
creativity as well, guys.
Yeah, definitely.
It is.
That's you.
Because I was listening to Katie last time, and you mentioned on your podcast it's like a superpower, and Sam says, well, it isn't. Why, Sam? Why is not a superpower?
Well, I mean, maybe ask Katie why she thinks it is, but I find I came to my diagnosis after many years of struggles with mental health and realizing that something was wrong, and I look back over my life and think I could have done without those struggles. I could have done with life being a bit easier at times. So I kind of find it hard to call something that was at times that destructive a superpower. But I know that Katie thinks it comes with lots of benefits, so we disagree on that.
I really do. We have a superpower episode in You're Wrong About ADHD, where we discuss this, and obviously we take a very different stand on it. But I genuinely think it's why we work in radio. That's the first thing. And I think the building where we work, which has a lot of different radio stations in it, is full of people who have ADHD, whether or not they know it. I think lots of people have it. And I think it really it gives you something special. It makes you think differently and creatively. And if you are lucky enough to be able to think quickly, that creativity is a real asset. And I think,
nice.
It's not a superpower for everybody, but I think it has been for us.
I'm going to translate a little bit for our Italian listeners as well, because we have, 350,000 Italian people live in London, just in London, guys. So we are a big community. Wow. And many of Italians listen to us right now in Italy. Quindi quello che abbiamo sentito è che per Katie è una superpower avere questa sindrome da deficit di attenzione. Per Sam non lo è stato, soprattutto da bambino, anche perché le loro diagnosi sono arrivate soltanto 2 anni fa. Quindi scopriamo insieme a voi, cari ascoltatori, come mai ancora oggi, sia in Gran Bretagna ma credo anche in Italia, sia così difficile avere una diagnosi precoce, quindi cercare di prevenire o cercare di trovare anche dei metodi per calmare anche alcuni comportamenti di chi ha l'ADHD. So I was first with Sam, we were talking about the diagnosis, because it's quite difficult even right now in both countries having a very early diagnose. You both had the diagnosis 2 years ago, right? How come, Katie?
Yes,
So
we were.
So mine came through my son. Mine is quite typical for a woman of my age. I'm 52. I'm a middle-aged woman, undiagnosed ADHD. And I'm very, very typical in that my teenage son was diagnosed because he hit a really tricky point in his education. And A-levels, GCSEs are a very typical time for a kid to be diagnosed. And in that process, it became very obvious to me that that's what I'd had, and that's why I'd struggled at school. Sam's was quite different, wasn't it, Sam?
Yeah, I mean, looking back, I was a hyperactive child, but I think part of the explanation as to why people are being diagnosed later in life is because of the widening of understanding. So if you think back to when I was at school, which is longer than I care to remember, but a good 20 or 30 years ago, there wasn't the same understanding of ADHD. And what we did know about it perhaps applied to those naughty hyperactive boys. And I think now the understanding of ADHD is much wider. I think schools are much more equipped to deal with it and spot it in children. It's still patchy around the country. There's still different provision in different places. But I think we're understanding ADHD in adults much more, understanding it continues into adulthood. And I think that and a combination of COVID, the lockdown that actually took away what lots of people had done to cope and to manage behaviors in the past, suddenly they weren't able to do. And I think we're now in a situation where we're recognizing, 1 in 20 people have ADHD. That's a high proportion of the population. And we're suddenly recognizing that.
True. Like in Italy, talking about stats, in Italy we have 950,000 people with ADHD. In the UK, 2.6 million people, according to the ADHD UK Foundation. So, I mean, it's quite relevant number. We can't underevaluate this kind of statistics. And so, how did you feel about it after the diagnosis, Katie?
Well, I think this is why our podcast, You're Wrong About ADHD, has been so much fun to make, actually, because we had really different responses to our diagnosis. It came at a time in my life when I've had most of my career. I'm much older. There's less at risk, I suppose.
Yes.
And for me, it was a huge relief to finally be able to explain what the hell was going on in my life, why things were such a struggle at school, why university in particular was so difficult. And Sam's response was very different. And, we worked together and realized that we had both been diagnosed with this thing. And it was over the course of conversations that we realized that actually the conversation we were having was quite an interesting one because it was so different. Because you explain how you felt about it, Sam.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, and I think it leads on to why we made the podcast. I mean, I wasn't initially. There's a sense of relief. There is a sense of relief of saying I've got an answer. I know now what is going on and what's been going on all these years.
Yes.
But then you've got to face the fact that somebody's saying to you, you've got what is classed as a disability, and you've been told you have a disability that you've always had and you will always have. And honestly, that comes with a massive sense of shock, actually, of saying, okay, well, this behavior that has caused me so many problems over my life, am I going to be like this forever? So if you ask me, could I take it away? Would I prefer not to have ADHD? I'd say yes, which is why I'm not quite as positive as Katie. But I think what we then said was, okay, how do we manage our ADHD? What does it actually mean to have ADHD? And how can life look different going forward now that I know I'm diagnosed? And that's sort of why we started the podcast.
Ecco, questa è una cosa bella che ha detto anche Sam. Diceva, Katie per lei è stato un sollievo una volta che è riuscita a capire qual era veramente il problema di tutte queste conseguenze che ha avuto nella sua vita. Ha detto, ok, adesso so come poter inquadrare meglio la mia vita e come poter risolvere questi piccoli problemini. Per Sam è stato uno shock. Vediamo che anche in Italia ci sono degli episodi simili. La cosa interessante è che però questa ADHD, come ha detto anche la scorsa settimana questa dottoressa De Mori, è che in realtà colpisce i pazienti in modo diverso. It affects people differently. But I was wondering, throughout all these years that you've been working together, is there any common pattern that you share and it belongs to ADHD? What is it?
Well, I think
you answer that.
There was a period of time when we were working together in a newsroom on different breakfast radio shows.
Right.
And we, it involves getting up at 3:30 in the morning, getting into work for sort of 4:15, 4:30. This is a stressful place with a lot of tension, a lot of rushing about and having to react to things very suddenly. And I know that Sam's way of dealing with stress is very similar to mine, which is to make a joke about it and sometimes lose it. And I remember finding him great fun to work with, but also it made me feel better about the fact that sometimes I would lose it too, because that's one of the things about ADHD which we have realized, is that emotional dysregulation is part of the package that comes with it. And newsrooms are stressful places, but I think I recognized in Sam the way I dealt with quite stressful situations.
So it's like you're feeling overwhelmed when there is a lot of work going on. Sam?
Yeah, definitely. Except that I think, strangely, it also draws you to those situations. I mean, one of the paradoxes about ADHD is that you can be overwhelmed by too much, but you can also be overwhelmed by not enough. So ADHD in itself is a lack of dopamine in the brain. So it's a sort of chronic lack of stimulation. So you're always seeking stimulation. If you get too much, you get overwhelmed. If you haven't got enough, you can get really tired. Now, for us, we both sought out a job, journalism, working in newsrooms, where our brains had to work really quickly, where there was an immediate buzz, where radio, you're getting that information and taking it straight to the public without any of the sort of more ponderous parts of journalism that you might get in newspapers. That clearly is a symptom of our ADHD, of seeking that buzz and that excitement, except that sometimes you get overwhelmed and you crash.
That's true. Ecco, quello che stanno dicendo è molto interessante perché loro lavorano insieme in radio da oltre 20 anni e quello che hanno notato è che è vero che questa sindrome, questo disordine colpisce tutti noi, anzi non tutti noi, colpisce quelle persone in maniera diversa, però hanno capito che quando c'è troppo lavoro si sentono super stressati e quindi non riescono purtroppo a deal with these kind of problems, e poi a quanto pare, quando invece non c'è quel tipo di stimolo, si sentono persi. Quindi loro cercano sempre degli stimoli, ma non poi così tanto, perché altrimenti c'è veramente un crash totale, non riescono ad andare avanti. So what's the solution? Which way you found that basically helped during these 2 years to live with it, and if it's only medication or even other type of ways to deal with it? Katie?
I was lucky.
Right.
I tried the meds and they worked for me. They don't work for everybody. So that has gone, that was a big leap forward for me, actually, and quietened the noise in my head and certainly made my thinking clearer and more efficient. But one of the brilliant things about the podcast, because Sam and I, again, are so different on this, Sam explain in a moment, is that we have been able to interview and talk to experts about exactly that question. How do we deal with ADHD? What's the best thing to do? Yeah, meds is one way. There are lots of other things that we can look at. And Sam has a really good reason for exploring all the things outside medication.
All right, Sam, what's your opinion about it?
Well, I tried the medication and the medication didn't work for me. So the medication works for about 80% of people, and there's some for whom it just doesn't work. It didn't work for me. And so I've had to find other ways. I've had a lot of therapy, a lot of counseling, and it is a sort of like managing yourself sometimes a little bit like a child. It's talking to yourself. It's making sure that you're doing regular exercise. It's making sure that you're doing breathing techniques, essentially taking all that energy that you've got inside and using it, but also making sure that you don't get overwhelmed. So you are constantly monitoring yourself and saying, right, have I done enough today to exercise my mind and to exercise my body? But be careful I've not done too much. So things like breathing exercises. Some people do meditation. Some people do mindfulness. Sometimes it's just about going for a big run, going for a swim, and also making sure you're getting a balance to life so you don't get bored, essentially.
Yeah, that's even true. Volevo mostrarvi anche questa cover del podcast. Guardate, You're Wrong About ADHD. I think it was right to show to other listeners where they can find you guys. And I really loved this cover because literally you both, you can express actually how people feel when they have ADHD. But what about music actually? Because we work in a radio station. Music help people with ADHD? Sam?
Well, there are some studies that suggest it can help people. I mean, I think it depends on your reaction to music. I mean, I find that music for me, when I'm really hyper and I'm sort of getting up and I'm full of energy, I find that really loud music, something like a Mendelssohn or a Beethoven symphony or a bit of Jimi Hendrix or something really gets me going. I find when I can't think straight, I find actually I can't have music at all. In terms of music therapy, I mean, yes, I think it probably does help with people, for focus and for, one of the hard things about ADHD is practice, and that's hard for everybody. But if you sit someone in front of a piano and say you need to practice, most people with ADHD are just say, I can't do this. But I think it can be beneficial, but it also can be quite challenging.
Is it beneficial for you, Katie? Maybe Italian music could be beneficial.
Maybe so. I've always loved music, and actually, I was somebody who loved to play music and perform. I sang as a chorister as well. I have always loved music, and I'm a great believer in music education for young kids. And actually, my son, who has ADHD, went to a little music group at a music school around the corner from us in Greenwich when he was a kid, and it got him. It really got him and grabbed him. And music has been a passion throughout his childhood and now into early adulthood, and still is for him. And I'm a great believer in music as a central pole of education for kids, and it should remain so, because I think for some people the ability to get up and walk around and play an instrument and be creative, that's literally ADHD right there. And for some children, they can't sit still, they can't sit down. Being able to pick up an instrument and feel good about playing something and performing is a real gift. But like Sam, I use music in different ways. It can energize me, it can calm me down, it can help me to relax. And we also have an episode on the podcast where we talk about composers who we think might have had it in the past, people like Rossini.
Like who, guys?
Like Rossini, we think
Rossini
we think had ADHD.
Always left things till the last minute. Always left things till the last minute with Rossini.
Yeah.
That's another interesting story about an Italian composer, actually, on London One Radio, shared by two presenters of classic events. So thank you very much about this curiosity. Next episode on the podcast. Any anticipation that we can share to our listeners?
Sure. We've just done an episode on medication this week, so pertinent to the conversation we just had. And next week we're looking at how to manage ADHD without medication. So we get into a conversation about whether actually even those people who have medication, whether they need to look at doing other things as well to manage themselves. So the two episodes go well together.
Yeah, and for anybody who maybe is waiting for a diagnosis and is on a waiting list, that is going to be a really important episode, I think, because it's about managing your environment until you can get seen by a doctor and get titrated, get the right meds
Yeah, because there are a lot of ways, actually, unfortunately, in the UK. And I want to ask this question before leaving you guys. After this podcast, I mean, the first episodes, what's the response of your listenership? I mean, their complaints about ADHD support as well in this country. Sam or Katie?
The response has been...
Yeah, the response has been absolutely incredible. We've had so many people get in touch. I think it's sort of surprised us a bit, and it just shows how big an issue this is for people. One, the number of people who have ADHD, but also the number of people who are waiting for diagnosis. And so to answer your question, the waiting lists in this country are anything from 6 months to 10 years in some places.
Oh my God.
It is because it's so oversubscribed, and there are different routes. So you can go through the NHS, and then you can choose to go with a private provider through the NHS. But even that has a waiting list. And then obviously there is private provision as well, but that costs quite a bit of money. So that's why the waiting list is so long, just because there are so many people who are undiagnosed.
Probably because of the social media now is becoming so popular that people think, oh, I've got ADHD, so I need to get diagnosed. Let's see, Katie.
Well, I don't think it's that. I honestly don't, because
Okay.
I don't think anybody goes in search of certainly medication unless they need it. I personally think, like Sam said earlier, 1 in 20 of us have this. 1 in 50 of us have a diagnosis in the UK at the moment. So that's 1 in 30 who don't have a diagnosis yet, if that's right. If I've got my maths right. But whatever the case,
I trust you with that.
we haven't yet got to the stage where we have diagnosed all the right people. And my question is this: after months of making this podcast with Sam, where we've interviewed some amazing people, experts in all the different fields that we had big questions about, is whether or not we are putting ADHD at the center of where it needs to be. So when we talk about eating disorders, when we talk about anxiety, when we talk about depression, we are very quick to treat those things, depression, for instance, with medication. And actually, we're putting some of those people on completely the wrong medication, because if they have ADHD, they should be on something else. And actually, ADHD can be very easy to treat. And if it were the first question that you asked at the center of all of these different things, it might go some way to solving all of those other things. 7-point-something million people are on meds for depression. So let's start there. Let's look at all of those people.
I want to share with you guys, because on Thursday there was a doctor. We have a show. Every Italian doctor come here who work in the UK and explain different topics to our listeners. And we were talking about ADHD. And she was saying, literally an interesting fact about ADHD, that not everybody, it's not always a genetic disorder, but it can actually become present in people's lives after depression.
Oh, interesting.
I don't know if you ever talked about...
It's one of an episode. Well, it's a podcast episode that I think we will probably be getting around to at some point. I mean, the general view is that it's genetic. Yes, there is a strain of thought that it can be caused by trauma, and I think that's an area of research at the moment, and something that certainly we want to look at in the podcast going forward.
But in the meantime, we can listen to discover more about ADHD to the podcast by Sam Pittis and Katie Breathwick on a Global Player, but any other type of digital devices. And if you allow us to insert this podcast in our page, in our website, so people can listen to it, well, we are more delighted to do that.
Grazie mille.
Grazie a voi. Thank you very much, Sam. And thank you, Katie, for being with us about it. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
E noi continuiamo invece con la nostra trasmissione di London Calling. Come avete potuto capire, è interessante sapere che non tutte le persone che hanno ADHD usano le medicine. Addirittura, come hanno detto Sam e Katie, l'80%, per l'80% delle persone le medicine funzionano, per altri invece funzionano altri tipi di modi per cercare di vivere con questo disordine. Tra l'altro io invito tutti voi ad ascoltare Il medico risponde, perché la dottoressa Letizia De Mori ha approfondito in maniera particolare questa tematica proprio insieme a noi nel nostro Voyager. Però è stato carino e credo anche interessante sapere che ci sono tante persone con ADHD. Voi che siete all'ascolto e magari avete ADHD non siete soli, quindi non vi sentite inferiori rispetto agli altri. Togliamo questi tipi di stigma che ci sono su queste persone, sentitevi un po' più inclusi, ci sono tante altre persone che hanno le vostre stesse difficoltà e cercano di affrontarle, e credo che questo podcast, che io lo rimetto, vi faccio vedere dove lo potete ascoltare, You're Wrong About ADHD, ecco, vi darà una idea più approfondita a 360 gradi di cosa è appunto la sindrome da deficit di attenzione. Bene, noi ci ascoltiamo un pezzo di Gianluca Grignani, La mia storia tra le dita, e poi tra poco tutte le ultime novità